America entered World War II ill-prepared for the shadow war that lay ahead. For decades, the very idea of espionage had been anathema to the nation's ethos. Secretary of State Henry Stimson, in 1929, famously shut down the Black Chamber cryptographic service. He did so with a dismissive wave. Stimson declared, "Gentlemen do not read each other's mail." By 1940, the existing intelligence agencies were skeletal operations. The Office of Naval Intelligence and G2 were primitive and inadequate, lacking global reach. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, for its part, had only just begun to establish a special intelligence service in Latin America. This fragmented and often rivalrous landscape of intelligence was coupled with a deep-seated aversion to covert action. It culminated in a catastrophic failure. The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, laid bare America's glaring vulnerability. It underscored an urgent, undeniable need for effective intelligence and covert operations. Could America truly adapt to such a brutal, unseen conflict? British pressure, alongside President Roosevelt's own recognition of these critical deficiencies, spurred action. In July 1941, Roosevelt appointed William J. Donovan to lead the Coordinator of Information. Donovan was a decorated World War I hero, known for his audacious personal bravery. He had once leaped into machine gun fire, suffering wounds but continuing to lead his men. Donovan had long advocated for the development of Special Operations Forces. The Coordinator of Information, officially established on July 11, 1941, marked the tentative, nascent beginning of a unified national intelligence effort. Donovan, a man of blunt pragmatism, believed America needed to play a Bush League game, stealing the ball and killing the umpire. He felt this was necessary if America hoped to catch up in the brutal arena of covert warfare. Despite initial resistance from established agencies, which formed a loose anti-COI alliance, Donovan's vision prevailed. On June 13, 1942, Roosevelt formally transformed the Coordinator of Information into the Office of Strategic Services under the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Donovan envisioned the Office of Strategic Services as a combined arms approach to shadow warfare. He sought to integrate persuasion, penetration, and intimidation. These were tactics he likened to sapping and mining in the siege warfare of former days. He also included propaganda, which he called the arrow of initial penetration. Far from being a mere sideshow in the colossal conflict, newly declassified records and the testimonies of over 300 veterans now confirm the Office of Strategic Services' crucial role. It provided critical intelligence and disrupted enemy operations. It ultimately laid the essential groundwork for future U.S. intelligence agencies, like the Central Intelligence Agency. The urgent need for unconventional warfare tactics against ruthless Axis powers drove the Office of Strategic Services to recruit out-of-the-box thinkers. It also drove them to develop dirty fighting techniques that pushed the very boundaries of warfare. Donovan sought diverse talent, from Ivy League professors to safer-crackers sprung from prison for specialized training schools. Camp X, a British-established facility in North America, became the clenched fist of Allied secret operations. There, early trainee Frank Devlin received orders that read like a spook book. He learned brutal techniques not taught in infantry school, including simulated sabotage and savage hand-to-hand combat. Another major facility was Area B, a 9,000-acre compound now known as Camp David. A central figure in this brutal curriculum was William Ewart Fairbairn, known as Fearless Dan. He honed his deadly gutter fighting system in the back alleys of Shanghai. Fairbairn taught agents that there's no fair play. No rules except one kill or be killed. He demonstrated lethal techniques like the tiger's claw and the swift, decisive use of the Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife. His chilling advice, never mind the blood, just take care of it quickly. Fairbairn recognized that American trainees initially harbored a natural repugnance to such brutal combat. These methods ran counter to the American sense of sportsmanship. Yet this aversion quickly dissolved as they grasped the enemy's complete lack of mercy. Lieutenant Charles Parkin, Jr., an early demonstrator of unconventional thinking, conducted an on-a-thighs, rain-soaked exercise. He used assault boats and dummy explosives to expose the pathetic security of a National Guard-protected bridge. His initiative earned him a transfer to the Coordinator of Information, There, he became a key demolition instructor, preparing agents for the realities of sabotage. The Office of Strategic Services Research and Development Branch, led by Stanley Lovell, became the real-life counterpart to James Bond's Q. General Donovan explicitly tasked Lovell with inventing every subtle device and every underhanded trick imaginable. They created Aunt Jemima, a plastic explosive cleverly disguised as baking flour. It could be transported easily and even baked into muffins, a demonstration of which nearly killed a Chinese cook who unknowingly ate them. Other devices included Casey Jones for derailing trains, detonated by light reduction. They also developed the Beano grenade, a baseball-shaped explosive with a butterfly mechanism, designed to stun and kill with steel fragments. Its power was tragically demonstrated when an army engineer, during a lecture, threw it in the air and was blown apart by the explosion, trying to catch it. They developed miniature .22 caliber Stinger guns, disguised as 3-inch pens. They also created pistols concealed within umbrella handles for close-range assassination. Fairbairn himself taught agents to roll an ordinary newspaper into a lethal dagger. For larger sabotage, a car movement control device, a magnetic disabler disguised with a fake Third Reich warning, was created to disrupt rail traffic. The Javaman, a high-powered, radio-controlled explosive speedboat with a rusty sea-battered exterior, successfully sank a derelict ship in the Gulf of Mexico during a test. Chemical agents included Me, a foul-smelling agent distributed to children in Chinese cities to embarrass Japanese soldiers. It caused them a world of face. For agents facing capture, L pills offered self-termination, providing instant death if bitten. K pills were liquid knockout drops. Early TD truth drug tablets, derived from tetrahydrocannabinol acetate, were even experimented with in May 1943. These extensive, often brutal training regimes and the innovative arsenal developed by research and development implicitly debunk any notion that Office of Strategic Services operations were solely about espionage. They were about fighting a total war by any means necessary. The Office of Strategic Services, through its integration of shadow war techniques into a combined arms approach, laid the essential groundwork for future U.S. intelligence agencies, like the Central Intelligence Agency. It established principles of covert action and special operations that continue to define national security to this day. The Mediterranean theater, a strategic crossroads of empires and battlegrounds, became the crucible in which the Office of Strategic Services forged its identity. Far from the icy training grounds of Camp X or the clandestine workshops of research and development, North Africa and Italy presented a chaotic, brutal proving ground. Here, innovative intelligence, covert action, and morally ambiguous alliances were tested under fire. The stakes were immense. Allied invasion plans hinged on accurate, real-time intelligence, necessitating extensive operations and the cultivation of local resistance. Nowhere was this more apparent than in the daring Black Bag operation, targeting the Vichy French embassy in Washington, D.C. As the North African invasion loomed, Allied planners desperately needed to crack Vichy's codes. The mission to penetrate the embassy, a sanctuary of diplomatic immunity, was fraught with peril. Under the cloak of night, a specialized Office of Strategic Services team, working with a French contact, meticulously navigated the embassy's defenses. The air thrummed with the silent tension of men risking everything. Every creak of a floorboard, every distant siren, threatened to unravel the delicate operation. The goal was the embassy's secure vault, where crucial cipher books lay hidden. Failure meant not only capture and diplomatic scandal, but potentially catastrophic losses for the impending invasion. When the team finally secured the intelligence, pages of meticulously photographed cipher codes, the relief was palpable. The stolen secrets provided an unprecedented window into Vichy French military dispositions. They directly influenced Allied bombing campaigns and helped to minimize French resistance during the subsequent North African landings. With Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa underway on November 8, 1942, the Office of Strategic Services role expanded from intelligence gathering to direct operational support. Despite the political complexities of dealing with Vichy France, Office of Strategic Services operatives worked to disrupt enemy communications and guide Allied troops through the unfamiliar terrain. The assassination of Admiral Darlan on Christmas Eve, 1942, though controversial, removed a significant political obstacle for the Allies. It further cleared the path for their advance. As the North African campaign concluded, Office of Strategic Services networks extended into the neutral, but strategically vital, Iberian Peninsula. From hidden safe houses in Spain and Portugal, agents meticulously gathered intelligence on Axis intentions and movements. This was a critical task for securing Allied supply lines across the Atlantic and into the Mediterranean. These operations often demanded uncomfortable compromises and posed profound moral dilemmas. In Spain, Office of Strategic Services agents sought to recruit Spanish Republicans. Many of them were veterans of the Spanish Civil War, languishing in concentration camps. The clandestine meetings were grim affairs, often held in hushed tones in dimly lit rooms. There, the desperation of the refugees met the cold pragmatism of intelligence. To offer a man freedom in exchange for risking his life as a spy in his own country, knowing the brutal consequences of capture, was a heavy burden for recruiters. Yet, the fight against fascism demanded such sacrifices. These recruits, often driven by a fierce anti-fascist ideology and a desire for revenge, formed the backbone of fragile intelligence networks. One such network, code-named Banana, attempted to infiltrate Spain by sea. It was a high-tension gamble that tragically unraveled. A shootout in Malaga, the capture of key operatives, and the subsequent executions of the Banana Boys by Spanish authorities sent a chilling message. The official Allied response was a swift cover-up, disowning the agents as a renegade group. A diplomatic crisis was averted at the cost of human lives. This incident, alongside the controversial agreement with the Mafia in Sicily, implicitly debunked any notion that Office of Strategic Services operations were clean or without significant human cost. They were messy, brutal, and often ethically ambiguous. They showcased the grim realities of shadow warfare and the risks inherent in dealing with desperate individuals and unsavory alliances. The Allied advance into Italy, often optimistically dubbed the soft underbelly of Europe, quickly proved to be anything but. Instead, it became a brutal, grinding campaign against fierce German resistance. This was accelerated by Italy's internal political instability. In July 1943, King Victor Emmanuel III arrested Mussolini. But this only paved the way for German forces to seize control of the country, disarming the Italian military. It transformed the conflict into a desperate war fought in the shadows. This brutal reality implicitly debunked the myth of an easy Allied advance. It revealed the critical reliance on clandestine efforts and human intelligence. As the American Fifth Army landed at Salerno and the British Eighth Army pushed northward, Office of Strategic Services units were immediately deployed. Their operations provided critical tactical intelligence, often pinpointing German heavy batteries and troop movements. Later, during the Anzio landings, when tens of thousands of Allied troops were pinned down in a precarious beachhead, the intelligence network organized by Office of Strategic Services agent Peter Tompkins in Rome became vital. It provided life-saving information on German battle orders and counterattack plans from behind enemy lines. The escalating casualties of early amphibious assaults, particularly in the Pacific, underscored the urgent need for specialized units. These units needed to be capable of underwater demolition and infiltration. These demands spurred the development of the Office of Strategic Services maritime units. They pioneered tactics that would lay the groundwork for modern special forces. Their capabilities were dramatically proven when Group 2 successfully penetrated the heavily guarded U.S. anti-submarine defenses at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Operating from a surfaced submarine, the team navigated rubber boats under the cover of night. They slipped past formidable gun batteries and submarine nets. This demonstrated the vulnerability of even well-guarded areas to small, highly trained teams. Imagine the pitch-black abyss of the Mediterranean, the only sound the muffled rhythm of your own breathing. A small team of Office of Strategic Services, swimmers, encased in their Lambertson units, glides silently beneath the surface. The water is frigid, a numbing embrace that threatens to steal warmth and focus. Ahead, the dark silhouette of an enemy harbor defense looms. A line of submarine nets, their steel cables a deadly entanglement. Their mission: to plant limpet mines on the structural supports of a vital coastal gun battery. This was a position impervious to conventional shelling. Visibility is almost zero, their hands moving by feel, along the rough barnacle-encrusted metal. Every shadow could conceal a patrol boat, every distant thrum a motor. The pressure builds, a silent scream in the darkness, as one swimmer feels a sudden tug on his line, debris, or something worse. They press on, each movement precise, a ballet of stealth and deadly intent. The limpet mines are carefully affixed, their magnetic grip firm. A final check, a silent signal, and they melt back into the darkness. They leave behind a ticking promise of destruction. Such missions, integrating Office of Strategic Services swimmers with Navy underwater demolition teams and adopting captured Italian amphibious equipment and units like the San Marco Battalion, significantly enhanced their capabilities. They pushed the boundaries of naval warfare. The Mediterranean theater, therefore, served as a critical proving ground for the nascent Office of Strategic Services. It was here that its innovative methods in intelligence gathering, covert operations, and psychological warfare were refined. They demonstrated their undeniable value to military command, despite initial criticisms and the controversial, often ethically challenging nature of their operations. The lessons learned and the tactics perfected in this complex arena would profoundly shape American intelligence and special operations for decades to come. From the sun-drenched chaos of the Mediterranean, the Office of Strategic Services turned its gaze to the clandestine battlegrounds of occupied Europe. There, a shadow war of intelligence and resistance would lay the groundwork for major Allied offensives. At its heart was neutral Switzerland, a surrounded island in a sea of Axis power. It provided Allen Dulles and his Office of Strategic Services Bern operation unique, if perilous, access to the Reich. Here, in the hushed quiet of a neutral capital, a German Foreign Office functionary codenamed George Wood, Fritz Kolbe, became one of Dulles's most invaluable assets. Kolbe operated under constant, suffocating danger. His hand often rested in his pocket, ready to end his own life rather than face Gestapo torture and compromise his mission. His microfilmed intelligence, the Boston series, took an arduous 10 to 12 days to reach Allied hands. It traveled hidden in a secret compartment above a steam engine's firebox, then by bicycle to Marseille, ship to Corsica, and finally plane to Algiers. This was a testament to the lengths taken for vital insights into Nazi Germany. Dulles's network extended its reach, gathering flash reports on the terrifying V-1 rocket program. It also contributed to the broader Allied effort to assess the German atomic bomb program. This confirmed that the Reich was years away from such a devastating weapon. But even in the relative safety of Switzerland, tension was a constant companion. The exposure of Cicero, the British ambassador's butler in Turkey, as a German spy, revealed a gaping security breach. It demanded Dulles's swift, discreet intervention to inform British intelligence. Then came the unravelling of the Sparrow mission in Hungary. It was a catastrophic failure within 48 hours. It exposed critical security flaws in Office of Strategic Services networks and led to the capture of Colonel Florimond Duke. His quick thinking under Gestapo interrogation nonetheless diverted German panzer divisions from the impending D-Day landings. A moment of profound danger and ultimate triumph arrived with the fallout from the July 20th bomb plot against Hitler. The failed assassination attempt triggered a swift and merciless blood purge. Hitler exacted a brutal revenge, executing thousands and decimating Dulles's German contacts. Yet amidst this horror, the intelligence gathered from these breakers offered crucial insights into the internal machinations of the Nazi regime. For Hans Bernd Gisevius, a key Abwehr agent and contact for Dulles, the purge meant 6 months as a fugitive in Berlin. His dramatic extraction in January 1945 was a masterpiece of deception. It relied on meticulously forged Gestapo papers and a silver warrant identity disc to navigate the treacherous checkpoints of a collapsing Reich. It was a narrow escape from certain death. Beyond the intrigue of Switzerland, the Balkans remained a brutal enigma. Office of Strategic Services efforts in Yugoslavia were a quagmire of conflicting Allied interests, particularly with the British. There was also the vicious internal power struggle between Mihailovic's Chetniks and Tito's partisans. The Tehran Conference, swayed by Churchill and Stalin, had already forced President Roosevelt to sever ties with Mihailovich. This was despite Office of Strategic Services reservations. Mihailovich's accommodation policy, a strategic choice to preserve his forces rather than face annihilation, was often misinterpreted as inaction. This narrative is implicitly challenged by the Chetniks' continued, often barefoot and unarmed, fight against German occupations. It is also challenged by their desperate desire to protect their villages from communist takeover. Office of Strategic Services teams like Alam and Amazon, equipped with their own radios, bypassed British-controlled communications. They provided crucial independent intelligence on German defences and early warnings of new weaponry like the V1. These teams were also instrumental in rescuing downed Allied flyers. This culminated in the monumental Halyard mission, which bravely evacuated 250 airmen. They were fed by the immense generosity of local villagers who sacrificed their own meagre rations. In Greece, Office of Strategic Services operatives and Greek guerrillas, the Andarts, waged a relentless campaign of ambushes and sabotage. They disrupted German troop and supply movements and made life for the average Lanza in Greece a nightmare. These actions, part of operations like Smashem, often provoked brutal German reprisals. Villages were torched, civilians massacred, and mass graves held 103 souls. It was a cycle of violence and vengeance. Captain Nick Puppers, leading Group 2, embodied this relentless struggle. During a daylight infiltration mission, his men, disguised in farmers' carts under hay, crept through German lines, crawling with Germans. A tipped cart nearly gave them away, saved only by Papas's quick thinking and fluent German. He convinced a patrol of a broken wagon, but then all hell broke loose. Pinning fire from pillboxes erupted, and a formidable armoured German Panzerzug arrived. It unleashed the worst fire that I'd ever been in. Amidst the intense machine gun fire and lobbed mortar shells, a skinny kid named Planas, fueled by sheer bravery, crawled through the inferno to retrieve blasting caps. His actions were a stark reminder of the immense human cost of these vital disruptions. Meanwhile, early Office of Strategic Services efforts to establish intelligence networks in occupied France faced their own unique crucible. Insufficient support from Algiers, internal suspicions among resistance factions, and the ever-present threat of Gestapo infiltration made every mission a gamble. Frederick Brown, codenamed Tommy, became the Office of Strategic Services' first agent to infiltrate France. He embarked on 4 perilous missions. He trekked 85 miles through mountainous terrain, starving and cold, only to find his networks compromised and his key agent, Vincent Dick, arrested. Brown himself narrowly escaped a Gestapo roadblock, shooting his way out in a desperate bid for freedom. The Gestapo's counterintelligence was brutally effective. Agents like Toto, who endured a harrowing revolver battle before his capture, then survived brutal interrogations and even orchestrated his own escape with the tacit help of his interrogator, exemplified both the ruthlessness of the enemy and the extraordinary resilience of the French agents. Despite these challenges, the Office of Strategic Services strategically built up the French resistance before D-Day. Charles de Gaulle's Herculean efforts united fragmented groups under the forces Francaises de l'Intérieur, creating a more cohesive force. The joint intelligence mission Sussex became a cornerstone of D-Day preparations. It integrated Office of Strategic Services and British Special Operations executive efforts into a special force headquarters. Sussex agents, meticulously prepared with false identities and even dental work, provided crucial strategic and tactical intelligence. This included the first identification of the Panzer Lehr Division's movements. This single piece of intelligence was deemed to justify the entire project. René Joyeuse, a Sussex agent, famously smuggled his radio equipment on a green bean train under the seats of unsuspecting German officers. He pioneered the audacious tactic of transmitting from directly next to German positions to mix his signal and prevent triangulation. He constantly operated under the pervasive, bone-chilling threat of capture. This was the reality for all agents infiltrating occupied France. It was a constant high-tension game of cat and mouse. Every shadow could conceal a Gestapo patrol, every unfamiliar face a potential informant. The air itself seemed to hum with danger, a palpable weight pressing down on those who slipped silently behind enemy lines. The myth of a seamless, well-supported Office of Strategic Services operation was quickly shattered by the reality on the ground. Agents often lacked basic supplies, begging for money to buy food. Yet, the resilience of French agents, operating under extreme duress and with limited resources, consistently demonstrated their ingenuity. They overcame these Office of Strategic Services deficiencies, through sheer will and courage. These operations across Europe, from the high-stakes intelligence hub in Switzerland to the brutal battlegrounds of Yugoslavia and the complex resistance networks of France, proved the Office of Strategic Services' ability to operate in the most challenging political environments. They gathered vital strategic intelligence and effectively supported resistance movements. They directly influenced the planning and execution of future major offensives. They demonstrated that the Shadow War was as crucial as any battlefield in shaping the course of World War II. As Allied armies broke free from the Normandy beachheads and swept through France in the summer of 1944, the war entered a new, relentless phase. The Shadow War, too, intensified, shifting its focus from supporting distant resistance to directly confronting the heart of the Third Reich. Office of Strategic Services operations in France and Germany became not just critical, but savagely personal. They deployed specialized units, sophisticated counterespionage, and psychological warfare to disrupt German forces, gather intelligence, and hasten the inevitable, brutal Allied victory. The Allied breakout from Normandy and the simultaneous Operation Dragoon in southern France on August 15, 1944, flung open new opportunities for Office of Strategic Services-supported Jedburgh teams and operational groups. These small, highly trained units, parachuting into the chaos, were tasked with organizing and arming local resistance movements. They turned them into potent, if often brutally effective, strike forces. The landscape was fraught with peril, not only from the Germans but from the vicious internal conflicts of the resistance itself. Office of Strategic Services agent Jacques Snyder recounted a harrowing ambush. He said, "Hell, we weren't shot by the Germans but by the communist underground. We were some of the first casualties of the Cold War." This brutal reality underscored the complex, often morally ambiguous world these operatives inhabited. The human cost was immense, etched into the memories of men like Jacob Berlin. He bore witness to the smoke rising from Oradour-sur-Glane, where scores were massacred. He also saw the chilling sight of 100 men strung up on lampposts in Toul as a stark German warning. Yet, these operations, from blowing bridges and railroad tracks to ambushing German convoys, tied down crucial German divisions. They prevented their redeployment to the front lines and directly impacted the Allied advance. Office of Strategic Services intelligence proved vital for the successful Operation Dragoon. It provided the fullest and most detailed ground intelligence, gathered by the daily heroism of the common people, who risked their lives to pass information. The battle for intelligence extended into a labyrinthine world of counterespionage and deception. There, the very fabric of reality was manipulated. The cracking of German codes by Bletchley Park, known as Ultra, provided a strategic advantage. Office of Strategic Services X2, or counterespionage, meticulously analyzed and disseminated this intelligence. But the true psychological warfare was in the doubling of enemy agents by the 20 Committee and X2. This allowed for elaborate deceptions that influenced German planning, such as the Phantom US First Army Group. This intricate game of mirrors, where agents were forced to read everything into a mirror and then back into another mirror, was a process that could make one lose your goddamn mind, as one X2 agent described. It highlighted the immense mental toll. The Germans' stay-behind strategy, intended to provide intelligence after Allied occupation, was largely turned against them. One such agent, Skull, an old sailor, was coerced into cooperation after his wife and son mysteriously disappeared. He was given the stark choice to cooperate or be handed over to the French. He was tasked with meeting his Abwehr officer, Friedrich Kaulem, codenamed Georges, to receive money and equipment. This meeting was set up as a trap, but in a moment of high tension and human error, an over-eager desk clerk, who had begged to join the field mission, prematurely popped up from behind a hedge. This foiled the capture and led to Kaulen's death. This intricate dance of deception, with its high stakes and unforeseen consequences, was as brutal as any battlefield. As Allied armies pressed closer, approaching and penetrating the Reich itself, the need for tactical and long-range intelligence intensified. This rendered previously established intelligence chains obsolete. This desperate need led to controversial decisions, including the utilizations of German prisoners of war as agents. Peter Sitchik, an Office of Strategic Services recruiter from a prominent winery family, found many recruits, initially thinking they would be interpreters, many felt honor-bound to continue even when faced with life-threatening missions. One young medical student, recruited by Sichel, was motivated by the simple, profound belief that anything he could do to shorten the slaughter of war was worthwhile. These high-risk missions were fundamentally transformed by the Jones/Eleanor communication system. This early cell phone-like transmitter was immune to German direction finding. The danger of this direct penetration was epitomized by 21-year-old Yuri Skarzinski, a former security service agent. He carried $10,000 worth of jewelry sewn into his clothes as he embarked on his high-risk infiltration of the security service in Berlin. He changed trains 14 times due to disorganized rail communications. It was a journey fraught with the constant fear of discovery. He was arrested by the Gestapo at 7 a.m. on November 8 during intense interrogation by high-ranking officers at 17 Lutherstrasse. Yuri pretended he was authorized to speak only upon his chief's authority. He successfully deceived his captors. Despite being closely watched, he managed to send a coded message to the Office of Strategic Services. It read, "Everything is all right, but cease all contact." This was a chilling indicator of his precarious situation deep within the enemy's lair. Anton Schrader, codenamed Bobby, a Dutch engineer, faced an even more immediate threat. An assassination team from the Dutch resistance mistook him for a turncoat Allied agent. Schrader, feigning outrage, pretended to work for the Gestapo as a double agent to survive. During the Jones/Eleanor contact on March 10, under Gestapo surveillance, he used frequent profanity as a prearranged control signal to warn Stephen Simpson. He said, "Try to have another damn drop at the place I mentioned to you last time. But be careful, they are trying to engage you." His quick thinking and Simpson's last contact on March 30th saved Schrader's life. Concurrently, the Office of Strategic Services Morale Operations launched sophisticated psychological warfare. They exploited German vulnerabilities and undermined their will to fight. Operation Sauerkraut, capitalizing on the July 20th plot, used former enemy soldiers as agents to sow confusion and doubt. Barbara Lauers, a principal architect of the operation, demonstrated audacious bravery. She physically retaliated against an arrogant SS officer during an interrogation. Black radio stations like Soldetensender Calais and Soldetensender West, disguised as German stations, expertly blended truth with fiction. By summer 1944, a remarkable 90% of German prisoners of war reported listening. The Nazis were so horrified by Operation Joker, which resurrected Ludwig Beck to broadcast calls for the war's end, that they jammed its broadcasts faster than any other Allied program. Joseph Goebbels himself noted these ghosting operations were creating the greatest confusion among the German public. Operation Cornflakes, designed to bring subversive propaganda to the German breakfast table, saw Office of Strategic Services master forgers create thousands of propaganda letters. This included a chilling counterfeit stamp depicting Hitler with his skull bones exposed under the header, "Right Shot to Hell." These efforts contributed to a decline in civilian morale and widespread confusion within the German mail system. However, the path to victory was not without its staggering missteps. The Battle of the Bulge, commencing on December 16, 1944, became one of the greatest intelligence failures of the war for the Allies. 18 German divisions, including 5 armored, launched a surprise offensive. They punched a 65-mile hole in American lines. This intelligence lapse was partly attributed to the U.S. First Army's dismissal of the Office of Strategic Services. It denied its agents transportation, rations, and quarters. Had Office of Strategic Services, tourist missions, been permitted to operate in the Eifel, their agents would almost certainly have spotted the massing of hundreds of troop trains and hundreds of tanks and tens of thousands of men. The brutal ruthlessness of Nazi countermeasures was starkly illustrated by the fate of the Dawes mission in Czechoslovakia. On Christmas Eve, the team celebrated in a mountain lodge, but 2 days later, German counterintelligence discovered their location. A 3-hour fight with partisan guards, escalating to artillery fire from Polomka, forced the mission to scatter into one of Europe's coldest winters. Most of the team, including Office of Strategic Services agent Holt Green, were captured and sent to Mauthausen concentration camp. There, they faced brutal interrogations and torture. Baranski endured hanging torture on a specially constructed frame. Green was among those executed in the camp's bunker, stripped, photographed with a dummy camera, and shot at close range. Some Dawes mission members, including Maria Gulevich, suffered unimaginable hardship. They hid in a lice-infested, abandoned antimony mine, where the parasites were half an inch thick in the seams. This forced them to burn them off with matches. Maria Gulevich suffered gangrene on her right leg, a lasting scar of their war fought against nature itself. Their eventual liberation by Soviet forces proved ironically harrowing. They were threatened, abused, and accused of being spies by the NKVD, enduring crude medical practices like amputations without anesthesia. Sergeant Steve Kaplos, however, managed a tense escape. He orchestrated a pre-arranged signal whistle of Yankee Doodle to confirm the arrival of American and British forces. He secured their freedom from Soviet custody. In the war's final stages, the Office of Strategic Services combined efforts in intelligence, counter-espionage, special operations, and psychological warfare significantly impacted German military planning. They contributed to their defeat. They laid the foundation for post-war intelligence structures. Their operations, often unseen and unheralded, proved that the Shadow War was as crucial as any battle in shaping the course of World War II. As the winter of 1944 bled into the spring of 1945, the Third Reich was a crumbling edifice. Its foundations were rocked by relentless Allied advances from east and west. Yet, even in its death throes, Germany remained a formidable, dangerous foe. It clung to the desperate hope of a national redoubt in the Alps, a mythical mountain fortress that, though largely a deception, still influenced Allied strategic thinking. The desperate need for intelligence on German capabilities, from their nascent jet production to the last reserves of oil and ball bearings, fueled the Office of Strategic Services' final frantic operations. Agents like Erich Siegfried Eriksson, whose daring infiltration of the German oil industry had already yielded vital intelligence, and Fred Mayer, whose earlier reports had pinpointed the Fuhrer bunker and exposed the redoubt myth, had set the stage for a final decisive push. Office of Strategic Services Espionage teams, a network of daring operatives, were now pushing deep into Austria and southern Germany. They moved like ghosts through the collapsing Reich, gathering critical intelligence on troop movements, the last industrial holdouts, and the ever-shifting German command structures. Their reports, often acquired at immense personal risk, painted a grim picture of a regime on the brink, but it was one still capable of inflicting terrible losses. Amidst this chaos, a different kind of shadow play unfolded, one that reached into the darkest corners of the Nazi hierarchy. Heinrich Himmler, the architect of the Holocaust, began to see the writing on the wall. Driven by a twisted desire for self-preservation and a fantastical notion of aligning with the West against the Soviets, he initiated backdoor diplomatic overtures. His personal masseur, Dr. Felix Kirsten, became the unlikely conduit, carrying Himmler's desperate proposals to Office of Strategic Services Agent Abram Hewitt. Brigadier Führer Walter Schellenberg, head of AM6, corroborated Himmler's intentions. He urged Hewitt, "For God's sake, don't let your contact be broken off. I am ready to have a conversation with him." This was a moment of profound tension, a high-stakes gamble that promised to drastically alter the war's end. It could potentially save millions of lives. But it also risked a fractured Grand Alliance by engaging with a problematic SS-led Germany. President Roosevelt, however, ordered an abrupt end to these discussions. He prevented a potential premature collapse of the Reich, but chose to maintain Allied unity, even if it meant prolonging the inevitable. Yet, a more impactful and successful initiative was already underway. In Switzerland, Office of Strategic Services operative Alan Dulles received an extraordinary personal initiative from General Karl Wolff, a senior SS commander in northern Italy. Wolff, seeing the futility of continued resistance, was willing to lead his forces out of the war. He cited the need to end useless material and human destruction. This clandestine dialogue, codenamed Operation Sunrise-Crossword, became a race against time. It was a desperate attempt to secure the surrender of hundreds of thousands of German soldiers before they could be slaughtered or fall into Soviet hands. The dramatic negotiation for the surrender of German troops in northern Italy was a climactic moment. It was a testament to the power of diplomacy, forged in the shadows of war. It was a resolution born not from battlefield triumph, but from painstaking high-stakes talks. There, trust was a fragile commodity, and every word carried the weight of countless lives. The relief, when the instrument of surrender was finally signed in Caserta on April 29, 1945, was palpable. Hundreds of thousands of German soldiers, a force that could have prolonged the war for weeks, laid down their arms. This happened more than a week before Germany's official capitulation. This single act, orchestrated by the Office of Strategic Services, significantly shortened the war and saved untold Allied lives. Even as this large-scale surrender unfolded, individual acts of bravery continued to shape the final days. Fred Mayer, the audacious Office of Strategic Services agent who had already provided critical intelligence, found himself captured and subjected to brutal torture by the Gestapo, enduring beatings, waterboarding, and having a pistol jammed into his mouth. He held on. He kept thinking, as long as I didn't talk, they would keep me alive. Despite his ordeal, Mayer, with the help of a Nazi official, negotiated directly with Gauleiter Franz Hofer for the surrender of Innsbruck. There was no chance, Mayer argued. Why destroy Innsbruck? Hofer agreed, and the city was spared. But even as the guns fell silent in Europe, a new shadow war was dawning. The Grand Alliance of wartime was largely a myth. The Office of Strategic Services had often operated behind the State Department's back, particularly regarding Soviet intelligence. Finland's Stella Polaris operation, a desperate, clandestine evacuation of its entire intelligence service to Sweden in 1944, had offered the Office of Strategic Services a bumper crop of hard intelligence. These were priceless Soviet codes that Donovan, despite State Department objections, acquired. This codebreaker's Rosetta Stone for the Venona project would later expose Soviet espionage. It became a crucial cornerstone of Cold War intelligence. Ned Putzel, an Office of Strategic Services executive, would later return the codes to a chagrined Andriy Gromyko, the future Soviet foreign minister. Gromyko seemed shocked that the Americans had ever possessed them. The race to secure German scientists and technology intensified. Office of Strategic Services teams scrambled across the collapsing Reich, securing V-2 rockets, advanced jets, and atomic research from secret laboratories. They even extracted key scientists from behind Russian lines. They protected figures like Nobel Prize winner Otto Hahn from Soviet capture, who sought to give him work without the benefit of free will. This frantic hunt for intellectual capital directly influenced the post-war technological race between the US and the Soviet Union. It set the stage for decades of Cold War competition. Despite its undeniable contributions, the Office of Strategic Services, born of necessity, was not destined to survive the peace. General Eisenhower had declared there should be no thought of its elimination, recognizing its immense value. Yet internal political rivalries, particularly from J. Edgar Hoover's Federal Bureau of Investigation and fears of a super-Gestapo agency, led to its swift disbandment by Executive Order 9621 on September 30, 1945. The cloud of suspicion from internal Soviet espionage, exemplified by figures like Duncan Lee, further weakened its position. However, the legacy of the Office of Strategic Services could not be so easily erased. Its operational experience, its unconventional methods, and the transfer of its iron-nerved spooks laid the crucial groundwork for future U.S. intelligence agencies. Most notably, the Central Intelligence Agency in 1947, the Office of Strategic Services had created a new paradigm for American intelligence. It demonstrated that a democracy, to counter totalitarian threats, must employ aggressive, unconventional methods. Its influences, and as one Central Intelligence Agency official would later state, meant that what we are doing is all Office of Strategic Services. The pioneering spirit of its agents, their willingness to fight fire with fire, and their enduring impact on spycraft and irregular warfare extended far beyond the end of World War II. They shaped the very nature of national security for decades to come.